So I feel like when people talk about sort of the aftermath of investment banking, people talk about the exit opportunities, or people will talk about the impacts on their physical health and stuff like that. But I want to talk about the psychological and neurological impacts of investment banking in my experience. So this will be both a review of the positive and the negatives. So the first thing is high standards / excellence. So any bank you go to will demand almost perfection from anything that you produce. Investment banking talks about how they look for people with attention to detail, and that is no joke. Everything that you do, whether that is a slide or whether that is an Excel, whether that is literally the Excel that goes into a chart that nobody will see, it needs to be perfect to the bank standards, and they will hold you up for that. So a common thing in investment banking, M&A, whatever you want to call it, is that you will end up double and triple checking your work because the last time you forgot to put a comma in, your manager shouted at you. So over time, you become very like, I need a triple, quadruple everything checked because I don't want to make a mistake again. And that has lasting impacts on your psyche, on your psychology. So even now that I've left banking, I am someone who will double and triple check an email that I'm sending to a random company, or an email or a message that I'm sending to a friend. You become someone who just has such attention to detail, and obviously that's a good thing in the work context. But you can assess whether that is positive or negative in a personal aspect, because it's not necessary to be perfect in everything. And actually, it's probably a waste of time to try and go back to refine your message, or just to read back the same message for the fourth time. Like, that isn't necessary, but that is a side effect of banking that will stay with you. So the second thing is that investment banking changed my concept and understanding of money. So if you work at any sort of bulge bracket, whether that is Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan, whoever, just for any bank probably, you are dealing with financials that are in such large orders of magnitude that this can get to your head a little bit. So just practically, right? Let's say you're looking at, you take an input number, 1.6 million or whatever. In your Excel sheet, you might just put 1.6 for ease, so you don't have like a lot of zeros or whatever. And over time, that number will just look like 1.6 in terms of units, even though that is millions. So as you continue your analysis, you might end up with the answer being 2,500, right? But that is not 2,500 in the way that you know it. It would actually be 2.5 billion. That is 2,500 million. So I find that over time, like, my concept of money my concept of numbers got very, very warped. Like, between me and a friend, I can talk about like 1.2k and thousands is a number that you can conceptualize in your day-to-day life. But billions and trillions are not actually numbers, at least for me, that I don't know what that means. Like, what exactly are we talking about here? And, you're doing this for, 14, 15, 16 hours a day, and you're exposed to these sort of numbers. I feel like I need to unpack this more, but I do think it has an impact on me and, like, on my understanding of what money is and what numbers actually mean. Another thing that banking did for me was to make me very output orientated. So I feel like in my time in banking, people just cared about whether you got the job done. Nobody wanted to hear, whether, you don't have enough information, or whether the task was actually not possible, or whether it's going to take a really long time. They just cared about getting the answer to their desk. And yeah, I think that has sort of snuck into my personal life. I'm very output driven. Like, okay, how do I make sure something is done? Like, it's not just about like, oh, I made progress towards this. Like, I want something to be done. And I think that can be positive. At the same time, it might also be negative in the sense that I think I've begun to expect that of people as well. So let's say, I'm in a group and we're booking a holiday or whatever. So the person that's maybe supposed to sort out the hotel, like, I'm not that interested in hearing, oh, there's a problem with this, or like, this hotel's too far, there's a pool here. Like, I just want to see in the group chat, hotel booked sort of situation. So yeah, I think there's pros and cons to that. Okay, so I think one of the most negative sort of psychological impacts of investment banking is that it made me a lot more impatient. So in my experience working in banking, no one really had the time to hear you sort of think through something or spell something out. Everyone wanted something as quickly and abruptly as possible. And I think that's just because people are so busy and it's a stressed environment. But what that meant was that I would sit and practice my sentences before going up to someone senior. So to make sure that, like, if I had a question to ask them or something to explain to them, it would literally take like 30 seconds. And yeah, I think maybe that's a good thing. Maybe being able to present your points succinctly is a good skill, I'm sure. But I do think when it spills into your personal life, that's not so great, in the sense that I found myself sort of wanting people to get to the point and to say things quicker. I think that's a really, really terrible trait. And it is something that I do think I have sort of, discarded and come out of, but it was something that for a while did affect me. Oh my god, the water is coming up to my knees. I love the beach. Okay, so this impact is quite broad, but I think it is really worth mentioning, which is just coping mechanisms as a whole. So I do think that obviously a common one is sort of substance usage and substance abuse, which is obviously a stereotype of investment banking. But I think there are other things such as, you'd notice that people start like twitching and fidgeting a lot because the job is very anxiety inducing, but it also demands you to have a like confident demeanor. So people end up sort of suppressing that anxiety, and that can manifest in a lot of fidgeting, a lot of twitching, stress balls being used all the time, or people just compulsively pacing up and down the office like literally all day. And I think whether that is a psychological impact being manifested in that or whether that will continue to have impacts, I'm not sure, but I do think it's worth mentioning. For me personally, I think my coping mechanism was dancing. Like, I think investment banking taught me to dance. I was never ever a big dancer, whether that is publicly or privately. Dancing is not something that ever comes to mind and I think about doing. Not really. I don't know when it started, but I found that after like really busy days, maybe I'd come home like 2:30, I would like waste 20 minutes dancing in the mirror. It was the most bizarre thing, but I think that is clearly, something mental manifesting in that dancing. Just some part of me just really wanted to dance. I don't know if that's a celebration or if that's like a release of the anxiety that I don't know. But that was what my weird little coping mechanism. I think other coping mechanisms which might not look like it are people overcompensating for sort of the lack of the socializing they get to do in their life by over partying or doing a lot whenever they have time. I think that's actually quite a common one. So people will, go on quite long benders, let's say, whenever they get the chance, or they will have massive splurges at the clubs, at the parties or whatever. That probably is a manifestation of something happening mentally. But I think after having the experience, like, you really learn not to judge people. Like, yes, the common thing of people using drugs. Am I allowed to say drugs on YouTube? I don't know, people using substances. It's easy to judge, but I think after you experience it, like, look, I'm out here dancing to myself in the middle of the night. I'm not going to judge you, whatever you choose to do to cope with these conditions, to be honest. And my final point, which is quite broad, but just so important and worth mentioning, is sleep deprivation. Gosh, it is so big a topic, and I think it's something that actually, quite frankly, like, I'm not sure that I fully know the impacts of that on me, whether that is mentally or physically. But I think fundamentally the body does keep score, and however your body or your mind chooses to react to sort of the conditions that you put it under for however long you're in banking, I think that's something that you just have to sort of deal with. So it's a bit of a broad one. As always, I'm still net positive on investment banking, but I do think it's worth highlighting sort of the psychological impacts that not enough people talk about. They are lasting, and they can be positive or negative, and they can also permeate into your personal life. But thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know if there are any sort of other video ideas that you have, and I will see you in the next one.